Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're in Game 9 of our coverage, the 2016 World Chess Championship. Game 8 was pretty crazy. We had Sergei Karjakin playing the black pieces, coming up with a win against Magnus Carlsen. So we only have 4 games left. Magnus Carlsen will play white in Game 10 and 12. Sergei Karjakin be playing the white pieces in Game 9 today and Game 11 as well, if we actually need all those games. So we'll go ahead and get started with Sergei Karjakin playing the white pieces, pawn to e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, similar opening as he has played before. And some of these have been pretty drawish. I'm not sure that he cares too much about drawing. If he draws out, he's the new champion. So Sergei Karjakin, bishop to b5, pawn a6, bishop back here to a4, knight f6, castle on the king side, pawn to b5, bishop to b3. And then Magnus Carlsen's the first one to kind of change things up. He recognizes that if he wants a victory, and even at the black pieces, Magnus Carlsen definitely has the opportunity to win if he can find some pretty creative opening lines. He needs to play something different, and that's exactly what he does. He goes more of the Graz defense, which bishop to c5, so not something we see all that common. Pawn to d6, bishop to e7, castling on the king side is what we've been seeing most of the tournament. Bishop to c5, immediately getting that dark square bishop involved into the center of the board. That's what he goes for. Pawn to a4, trying to strike this pawn defense over here on the queen side of the board, and then rook to b8. He had some different options. He could have played pawn to b4 immediately, trying to break some of these pawns. Let's say pawn here to c3, pawn takes on c3. Could recapture with his pawn, could take with his knight, but I think this is kind of the approach he wants. He could then play rook over here to b8, has a semi-open file to start attack, castle on the king side, has double bishop pair, can really start to open up the board and start to attack his opponent, but decides to go ahead and play rook here to b8 and then pawn up to c3. Now it's too late to play pawn to b4, because after pawn to b4, then all of a sudden pawn up to d4, if we do see an exchange on board, bishop comes back here to e7 since it was being attacked, and then now knight to g5 is just... it's catastrophic for Magnus Carlsen. He can't really come back from that with the bishop attacking here on f7, forcing the pawns up here. All in all, this is going to be extremely bad. So he didn't go down this line. He decided in this position to play pawn here to c6 or d6, solidifying this pawn chain, getting ready to castle on the king side. Pawn d4, the bishop comes back. Could have exchanged if he wanted to on d4, but decides to go and hold on to that double bishop pair, knowing that he needs all the material really he can to have some sort of big attack later on, have a chance for victory in this game. Pawn takes on to b5, pawn recaptures, and then after knight a3, Magnus Carlsen really has to decide if he wants to try to hold on to this pawn or castle on the king side and then start for an attack on the king side of the board. Magnus decides to go ahead and castle on the king side, and then after the knight takes on b5, after giving up material, bishop down here to g4, pinning down this knight. The bishop comes to a c2, protecting this pawn, recognizing Magnus Carlsen starting to attack a lot on the king side of the board. Pawn takes d4. After the knight comes back, we do see another exchange, and then the bishop takes on g3. And this kind of sets up the pawn to capture. Doesn't want to recapture with this queen here, because then the bishop comes down, takes on d4, really controlling the center of the board. So this is kind of Magnus Carlsen's plan. He says, there's an opening on the king side. You don't have protection in front of your king, so I'm going to start to really attack that. Sergei Karjakin, he has a pretty solid position here. After knight to h5, that actually was played, king here to h1. He can bring his rook to g1. If you ever played against this, it does get kind of tricky. While you don't have a lot of defense in front of your king, you also can really start to put pressure on your opponent because you're attacking their king side of the board. You have double bishop pairs for white. That's very dangerous. You have double rooks. You can double barrel, get your other rook involved into this G file. So really start to put pressure. So both sides are somewhat vulnerable to a strong attack from either side of the board. So both sides have to be very careful on board. But all in all, I definitely choose Karjakin's position. He is up a pawn in material, double bishop pair on a fairly open board. I think he has a pretty strong attack here. Queen here to f6. Bishop to e6, adding another defender on this square in the center of the board here on d4. Pawn here to c5, pawn up here to a5, and then we do see some exchange on boards. And I think Magnus Carlsen actually ends up pretty well on this exchange because he essentially sticks Sergei Karjakin with some isolated pawns. So before, with this pawn on e4, his pawn structure, even though double pawns on the f-file, they were kind of connected in the center. That's pretty good. But after the exchange, white's up a pawn in material, but his pawns don't really play nicely with each other. So Karjakin double bishop pair, but I think Magnus Carlsen did well to kind of maneuver out of that. Sergei Karjakin plays rook up here to a6, pinning down this bishop to the queen. White's doing a good job of continuously putting pressure on his opponent, not staying back and playing defensive. He could, as we talked about, just draw the rest of this tournament and win. And so far, we've seen him play pretty defensive all throughout the tournament. Even as white pieces, we've seen more passive moves than very aggressive moves. So you can see in this one, even though Magnus Carlsen came out with that grass defense, getting his bishop involved, Karjakin is not backed down. He seems to be prepared for this long theoretical opening that we have, and seems to be playing extremely well and more aggressive than even I was expecting. So rook over here to d8, just trying to get it more involved into the center of the board. Wasn't really doing too much on f8. And then rook over here to g1. So starts to attack the semi-open file as we talked about, and just kind of builds the pressure on Magnus Carlsen to defend lots of things. He has to worry over here. He does have this pass pawn in the center of the board, and then now he has this rook over here on g1. Carlsen with queen to d7, a rook up here to g4. Getting ready to protect this square, but also he could swing it over here to h4, start to add more pressure. Eventually, he could swing his rook to g1, add double rooks here on this king side of the board, really start to add pressure to Magnus Carlsen. Knight to f6, kind of forcing the rook, but that's kind of, I think, where Karjakin wanted to go. Rook over here to h4. Queen down here, b5, attacking the rook. Rook just swings back here to a1. Pawn to g6, and the rook here to b1. This does open up for the bishop to come here to f7, sacrifice check, and that would have a discovered attack on the queen here on b5. So Magnus Carlsen immediately played queen to d7, and then queen up to d3. Still protecting a lot of the same material the queen was before, but it does allow him to get a little bit more aggressive if he wants to. Attack some of the squares. Queen here to c4, putting pressure on f7 a little bit later on if he wants to. Can easily get involved, attack on the king side of the board if he wants to be fairly aggressive. So just opens up the door for some options. Knight here to d5. And then rook to g1. So Karjakin starts to add pressure on the king side of the board with his rooks. But this move from Magnus Carlsen, the knight on d5, although this knight's not on an outpost, it is doing a lot of things that he wants to be doing. It is fairly well protected. Karjakin's probably not going to be looking to give up his double bishop pair right here, but this knight does stop this light square bishop. The light square bishop's aimed at this square here on f7, which is kind of a weakness for Magnus Carlsen with so much pressure building up on this side of the board, but also stops this pass pawn here on d4 from pushing up. So that's exactly what Magnus Carlsen's looking to do. He has to play somewhat defensive right now, recognizing that his opponent has a stronger setup as far as an attack, does have the double bishop pair, the double rook over here on the king side, but doing a good job. And I think this knight here on d5 allows him to play just the correct defense that he's trying to. Carlsen from here plays bishop back here to c7, bishop here to g5, attacking the rook. Rook is forced to come over here to e8, controlling the e file, so that's always good. Queen to c4, and then rook down here to b5, and then queen back to c2. And if you watch the press conference, this was one of those moves where Karjakin, they always look at lots of positions and just get each player's take as far as the opening, in the middle game, and the end game, how it ended. They just want to see what each of the players was thinking. This position specifically, Karjakin said he had a little hope. And the little hope was after the queen comes down here to c2, he wanted his opponent to play knight to b4. Okay, this is a discovered attack on this bishop. Now the rook is protecting it here, but opens up the door for more attacks on board, and it does attack this queen here on c2. So Karjakin would have to respond. Now, what Magnus Carlsen probably saw and what Karjakin was hoping for is that he could play queen to c6. And this would be a devastating take. Magnus Carlsen would have to respond to this because queen here to h7, that starts to get extremely bad, as you can imagine. But after the pawn takes here on g6, then bishop to f6, and there's no way to stop a mate threat with just rook up here to h8. Now, he could kind of delay the inevitable with rook to h5, but then we just have the take here because this rook here on g1, kind of stopping this pawn from taking right here. So there's no way to really stop it. Queen down here to h3 delays the inevitable, but at the end of the day, rook up here to h8, it would have been checkmate. So that's what Karjakin was hoping for. That would have been pretty epic if this game ended like that. Magnus Carlsen's not having any of it. I'm not even sure if he ever thought about moving his knight, which is so crucial in the center of the board. But Karjakin at least was hoping for that. Rook over here to a8. Bishop to c4, and then we have a rook to a5, kind of double barreling, but does want to get out of the way of the bishop attacking it. Bishop down here, d2, just continues to put pressure on his opponent, attacking the rook. Rook comes here to a5, attacking the bishop. Queen to d3, centralizing, protecting that bishop. Rook down here to a1, decides to go ahead and exchange, and then king here to g2. And then knight to e7. This was kind of the highest point in the game. If you see what Magnus Carlsen is trying to do, he has a decision to make. He wants to start to get his knight involved to the king side of the board because he does see a lot of the pressure building up. But there's kind of this weird transition where he wants to bring his knight to f5. That's kind of the dream square. It's a nice little outpost move for him. Can stop a lot of the critical squares that Karjakin's trying to build pressure on. But in between here, Karjakin has a decision. He has two moves that he can really play. And afterward, he said he looked at both of them. In this position, they're move 39, and once you get to move 40, you do get additional time, and he used 25 minutes, so essentially all of his time he had left on this move. Now, he had two options. He could take here on f7 in exchange that will kind of go over the variations. He also had the option of playing queen here to b3, just setting up an attack of bishop taking on f7. Now, in the game, he decided to go ahead and play bishop takes on f7. And, everyone on social media and at the press conference was kind of like, hey, we did not expect you to play bishop to f7, mostly because he's played pretty defensively. He hasn't been super aggressive with any crazy, tactical sacrifices or variations that are just really complex. He tries to be, pretty composed, not to get any trouble and just not make any mistakes. So bishop to f7, not what everyone was expecting. That's what he played after the king takes here on f7. Queen to c4 check, essentially forcing his opponent to come to g7. Needs to protect the square here on h7. So king here to g7 is what Magnus Carlsen played. If he tries something else, let's say king to e8, it all falls apart after the rook takes on at h7. So cannot allow that to happen. So he does decide correctly, play king here to g7. And then pawn up to d5, threatening the bishop to c3 check, which would fork the king, get this rook here on a1. Starting to get some of that material back since he did sacrifice a bishop. Now, black would really like to play rook here to d1, like getting out of harm's way. But then after the bishop here to h6, this is very difficult. We see the king come to h6. Bishop here to g5, giving up material, but really just wants to play rook up here to h7. That's just so dangerous. Queen down here to a d5 check. We can see the queen come up here to e7. And this is just really threatening the rook here to f7. So maybe it could also take the bishop, depending on where the bishop moves to. But let's say bishop to d8, then all of a sudden a rook to f7 check. No kind of way around this. The queen has to come here, take on f7, and then all of a sudden this would be a very losing proposition for Magnus Carlsen. Queen better than a rook and a bishop, and then 3 pawns to 1. That would be extremely bad. So as we come back after the bishop takes and the king takes, there is no way to stop this. So instead of playing rook over here to d1, the knight comes to f5. And this is kind of the square that Magnus Carlsen wanted to come to all along. But I'm not sure he wanted to come to at this position. He probably wanted to do it a little bit earlier. But bishop to c3 check, forcing the trade of the rook here on a1 and the rook over here on h4. Queen takes on h4, and then the queen takes on d5. Now in this position, if we kind of look at it, Sergei Karjakin is up a pawn in material. But all the commentators kind of looked at it and said, if you come back here, instead of taking with the bishop on f7, if he were to have played queen to b3, he probably would have ended up winning. And even after Magnus Carlsen saw bishop to f7. Magnus Carlsen getting ready to get to move forward. He looked at this position and he kind of had this look on his face of, wow, I kind of dodged a bullet there. Things could have gone a lot worse for me. So all in all, we did see an amazing sacrifice from Sergei Karjakin, but at the end of the day, not completely sure that it was the best move, and he did recognize that at the end of this game, because this ending is very, very difficult for anyone to turn into a win. Now, not sure in this position, Sergei Karjakin kind of looked at it and said, hey, I had such a strong attack. I had lots of opportunities, and then essentially almost had a coin flip of finding the right move. And maybe if he had a few more minutes, he may have played queen to b3. I think they could have drawed in any position. Magnus Carlsen even playing queen back here to f7 says, let's just go and exchange queens. The game is over. Let's go on to game number 10 where I'm going to have the white pieces. Karjakin decided to play on. You can see that they kind of moved their pieces around for another few hours. No side really made any advance in the game. For the most part, they didn't even move their pawns too much. Every now and then they'd move just a little bit, but no side could really break through in the game. There's just no way with bishops on the same square and the queens. And Magnus Carlsen essentially just trying to trade off for Karjakin to do anything besides draw this game. So at the end of this, it was a 6-hour marathon. And after what probably could have been a draw, they played for another 3 hours. And then after this position, the bishop comes here to f6. Karjakin decides, okay, this could just go on forever, and no one's doing any improvement. So they decide to draw this game. But I say kudos to Karjakin. After the big win with the black pieces, I really expected almost a fast draw in this game, which I think he could have easily done. But he came out very, very nice preparation when Magnus Carlsen played kind of an odd defense. He still was very aggressive, didn't let Magnus Carlsen take the initiative at all. And at the end, he essentially had a coin flip to maybe win. I think it would have been difficult to win with queen to b3, but a lot of people are saying he had much better lines that he could have taken, put Magnus Carlsen in a tough spot. Magnus Carlsen said, this was a marathon and queen to b3 would have been much more difficult. So Magnus Carlsen seemed excited that he came out with a draw, and he does have white for 2 of the last 3 games. So all in all, we will be playing the rest of the games. So game 12, there's not really a scenario. Even if, I guess Karjakin could win the next 2, we don't have game 12 then. But for the most part, we'll probably be playing all 12 games. Magnus Carlsen. It may come down to the very last game. If we do have a kind of tie in points, then we'll have a tiebreaker. So the last game, game 12, is on November 28th. They would take a day off and then come back for the tiebreaker, and they would play some quick chess, some 15-minute, 5-minute chess, and at the end of that, they play Armageddon, which we'll get into if that time arrives. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this game. The last few games definitely been pretty exciting, much more so than I'll say the first 6 games in the tournament. So definitely enjoyable. Looking for some crazy fireworks in game 10 as Magnus Carlsen has the white pieces, and know that he really has to come out with a win. Does not want to put it all on game 12, because then Karjakin's going to be in the drawish mood that you haven't seen from anyone before. So game 10, he really needs to make something happen. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see y'all in game 10.